In the summer of 2017, a few of my friends and I decided to plan a fun camping trip to a forest not too far from where we lived. Despite its small size, the Delamere Woodland Forest provided us with a much needed opportunity to interact with nature. While city life might be fun and beneficial, it can also be suffocating sometimes, so any opportunity we had to escape to the wilderness was always welcomed. Unfortunately, as the camping trip date approached, things began to unravel. One by one, several of my friends texted to say that they wouldn't be able to make it due to family illness, a lack of funds, or just simply laziness. In the end, only 4 of us ended up going on the trip. We packed up the SUV early the next morning and started on the trek to the forest. When we arrived, we parked and put our hiking gear on to start venturing into the woods. The weather was totally awesome and consisted of a cloudless blue sky with a gentle breeze that made the hike through the woods far less uncomfortable than we thought it would be. It didn't take long for us to discover a nice shaded location next to a river that we could use for washing and drinking water. The only issue was that the area was right out in the open and wasn't secluded at all, but we decided it was okay, so we ended up making camp there anyway. By this time, it started getting late in the afternoon and it had been a long day. We were a little tired and decided to create a fire to cook dinner over and relax by. After we started the fire and began cooking dinner, the fragrance of burning wood and cooking food attracted a couple of locals to our camp. Unfortunately, when you cook food over an open fire, it's as if you're broadcasting your presence to the entire forest by megaphone or something, but we were used to this and weren't surprised. It looks like they had just come over to say hello. They appeared to be pleasant at first, and this may sound paranoid, but the entire time I had a really bad vibe about them. They had really awkward body language and something screamed that they just weren't genuine. I wasn't sure if it was the way they looked at each other or the weird questions they asked, but I thought they were behaving in an odd way that just didn't make sense. As soon as they left, one of my friends, Steve, suggested that we move our camp right away. Now, normally he's the one who's paranoid or afraid, and we tell him to calm down and relax, but this time we all knew he was right. Even if we were being a little too cautious, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Now, as tired and half drunk as we were, we packed up all of our things, put out the fire, and then started looking for a new spot. Fortunately, after searching for a while, we found a hill with a lot of trees that looked out over our old campsite on one side and gave us a really good view of the area around, which was nice. As we built another campfire, it became dark out. We drank some beers and partied for a while. We were having some hilarious conversations around the fire until we became too exhausted and too drunk to continue, at which point we went to our tents and fell asleep for the night. I'm positive that I passed out immediately as soon as I laid down in my sleeping bag because I don't even remember falling asleep or anything. I only recall waking up and opening my eyes in the thick black darkness and to the sound of a truck in the distance revving its engine. At first I was kind of pissed to be woken up as my head was pounding due to all the beer we drank the night before, and I felt like death warmed over. As I attempted to go back to sleep, I again heard the truck in the distance revving its engine, and the sound seemed like it was getting louder and louder. I started to get the feeling that this wasn't good, and something told me to check it out. By this time, I started to hear voices, and it sounded like a group of guys who were probably just out joyriding and hanging out, but as I stated earlier, sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry, and I just wanted to check it out. So, I unzipped my tent and went outside, and as I approached the crest of the hill, I could see headlights off in the distance, lighting up our old campsite where we were set up previously. This is where all the noise was coming from, and apparently it was the same guys who had come by earlier, and they brought 3 other guys back with them, and it looked like they were looking for us down there. My first thought was, I'm really glad we moved from that spot. When I went back to our campsite, I woke my friends up and told them what was happening. I had to describe it to them 2 or 3 times because they were drunk and half asleep, as I was, but once the reality set in, they were both up on their feet with me. We immediately kicked dirt onto the fading fire to put it out so they wouldn't see it, and grabbed a set of binoculars that we had with us and went back to the side of the hill to see what was going on down there. After watching them for a minute or 2, we were horrified because of the lights they were carrying. We could see they were carrying baseball bats, some rope, and one of the guys had a gun. They were drinking and cursing and clearly enraged that we weren't there and that they had returned too late to catch us. We just sat there in the dark and couldn't believe our eyes and ears. If the guys down there had decided to cover the area more thoroughly, they would have easily discovered us, but due to our luck, they didn't, thank God. Despite the fact that they ended up leaving, none of us could sleep. We ended up packing our things up early the next morning and leaving. We were scheduled to spend another 2 nights there, and I was kind of bummed that we had to cut the camping trip short. But with those kind of guys walking around in the area, it wasn't worth it, and we didn't want to take any chances. To this day, I always wonder what they would have done if they had caught us. My name is George, and I've spent the majority of my life in the wilderness. There had only been a few occasions when things had become genuinely strange or scary for me while being out there. However, most things can be explained scientifically. I've spent a significant amount of time camping, hiking, and hunting, and having observed a wide range of predators. I've been in some tricky situations, which include being stuck in the middle of some major storms to being chased by bears and everything in between, so I'm not easily frightened, until now that is. It was the middle of July, and I was camping at my family's farm in western Iowa with my fiancée Anne-Marie, my best friend Harry, and his new girlfriend Jane. Jane had never been camping before, so it was all new to her, so she was naturally a little frightened, but we were keeping an eye on her. In this area of the state, we have to keep a constant watch for different wild animals because they can be a common occurrence and obviously quite dangerous. We set up camp in a clearing on top of a tiny hill with a few trees, but we were definitely in the deep woods. Once we were set up and had everything in place, we cooked dinner and had some drinks and just relaxed. By midnight, everyone had gone to bed except for me. I was sitting by the fire enjoying the smells and crackling of the wood and the heat it was throwing off. For me, the natural sounds and sights of the woods were like a drug, and sitting among nature was probably my most favorite thing to do in the world. Sometimes I'd even meditate, and I felt at ease with myself and everything around me. I was pretty relieved that no one had been injured while hiking. Aside from a few insect and mosquito bites, everything was going smoothly, and everyone was having a good time. I ended up going to bed about a half hour later, and I was so tired I think I just passed out because I don't even remember my head hitting the pillow. At about 3:15 in the morning, we were suddenly woken up by the sound of screaming. It was Jane yelling at the top of her lungs. I couldn't believe how loud she was screaming. It was insane. Anne-Marie grabbed my flashlight because it was pitch dark and rushed out of the tent. I told her to stay in our tent in case something bad happened, but she didn't listen. When we went over to the other tent, Harry was already attempting to comfort Jane, but she was incoherently babbling about something huge that was outside their tent, and it was grunting and touching the tent. She said at first she didn't know what it was, but then it made a low, deep, dreadful growl, and it sounded like it was big. I told her it may have been a coyote or perhaps a mountain lion, and she said that it wasn't because she knows what those animals sound like. We had very little food and trash, but it was outside of the camp area, so that wasn't an issue. But I promised her that I'd stay up and relight the fire, and then Harry and I would take turns watching for anything. I let her know that between our movement and the flames of the fire would scare off any animals. This seemed to comfort her a little bit, and she went back to sleep with Anne-Marie. Both Harry and I stayed up by the fire and watched for any animals, and over the next 2 hours we didn't see anything out of the ordinary or strange. After about 30 minutes more, Harry said that he had to take a leak, so we got up and walked just outside of where the fire was throwing its light. He was to my left, and my tent was in front of me on the other side of the fire, and Harry's tent was behind me. As I sat there waiting for Harry to finish, I noticed something and heard a loud crack. Harry heard it as well and was literally still zipping up his pants as he ran back towards the fire, wondering what the hell was that. He asked, "Was that you?" And I said, "No, I haven't moved, plus it came from over there." I went over and grabbed my rifle and my flashlight out of my backpack. At this point, while I was shining the spotlight around the camp out into the dark woods, I told him to throw some more wood onto the fire and get it going bigger. Hopefully the flames would scare away any wild animals. After a few more minutes, we heard another stick break, but now it was on the other side of the camp. I was starting to wonder if we were being surrounded and all kinds of crazy things were running through my head. We were both standing up and kept turning as we heard noises around us. I had a gun, but there was nothing to shoot at, so I just kept aiming a flashlight around, but didn't see anything until I heard a low growl in back of me to my right. I spun around and aimed the light, and for a split second I saw it before it disappeared into the dark behind a tree and some thick bushes. Harry didn't see it, but I told him he's going to think I'm crazy, but I saw a gorilla-sized, man-shaped, hairy animal, and before he could say anything, I yelled back at him and said, "And it wasn't no freaking bear." At this point, I was just trying to hold it together. I didn't know if at this point I should wake the girls up, although I couldn't imagine that they weren't awake by now after all the commotion. But we were trying to keep somewhat quiet, and I didn't want them to start screaming or be scared. Harry and I decided to sit back to back and just watch. We were so pumped up on adrenaline that there was no way either of us was going to doze off. For the rest of the night, we periodically heard growling sounds here and there. We were scared to death the whole time, wondering if we were going to suddenly be attacked by 4 or 5 of these things. There was clearly more than one of them. Now, I know I had a gun, but I still wasn't interested in going anywhere outside of this camp until it was light out. The crunching and snapping sounds continued to be heard from the trees all around us on a regular basis, and although it was dark, we could still see something out in the shadows moving back and forth out beyond the trees. I kept the fire burning bright, and I don't know if it helped us, but morning finally came, and we were never attacked, thank God. The girls woke up, and we packed everything up and left as soon as possible. They asked us if we saw anything, and we said no, it was pretty quiet, but as we were leaving, Harry and I noticed a lot of big footprints in the dirt all around the outside of our camp, and when I say big, I mean big. We just looked at each other in horror as we walked. I'm not sure what else to say except that I have never believed in Bigfoot or anything like that, and maybe I still don't, but I've never seen anything like those things we saw last night. We never told the girls, and to this day, Harry and I don't say much about that night, but I know what we saw.